All right, it is 6 o'clock. If we could go ahead and take seats so we can go ahead and think about getting started. Think about getting started because, you know, we just think about a lot of things here. This is the Carbondale Unitarian Fellowship after all. It is 6 o'clock. If we could go ahead and take seats so we can go ahead and think about getting started because, you know, there's an echo in here. What else is new? There, yes, and there is a delay on YouTube, so that is okay for sure. I know, try not to watch yourself. Look at that, isn't that cool? Because it's even like a delay and everything. So fun times. Welcome everyone. It's so great to see you all here. My name is Carrie Vine. I am the community, hang on, let me think of all my titles. Community Relations Chair at Rainbow Cafe. And I'm also the chair of the Social Action of Southern Illinois. Thank you. You know, I used to have a speech impediment where my S's were really difficult for me. And I used to have to do Sally sells seashells by the seashore all the time as a kid. And I still kind of trip up a little bit on my S's. So anyway, that's a big word for me to say. So, but I am very pleased to have you all here. And even more, I am pleased to have Kathy Fields from District 95 here. I'm happy to have Annette James, who is a candidate for Regional Office of Education number 30 Superintendent here as well. And then Nancy Bittner as well is a candidate for Regional Office of Education District number 30 as well. When is the election, you all? June 28th. I knew I could get it right from them really quick. So that is coming up. And so for us to have a town hall, this town hall will be specifically about youth in the schools for us, how it affects our youth, transgender youth, non-binary youth, things that we can do for our LGBTQ youth within the school. For this town hall, I invited many different organizations and many different legislators. I invited senators, representatives from all over, from our district. Some of them responded, some of them did not at all. So I am very pleased to have these three here and grateful for them to be here. For a minute, we're going to have Mike Zierig to come up. He is with Equality Illinois Policy Director. He is going to talk a little bit about our statewide network and what it is. And then I will turn it over to Johnny Gray after that. Mike?
Oh, this is weird seeing myself. So I'm not going to look over that way. Sorry, Johnny. I'm not going to look at you. Hello, everyone. Mike Zierig. I'm the Director of Public Policy at Equality Illinois, the state's LGBTQ plus civil rights organization. My pronouns are he, him, his. And really happy to see this great turnout and the folks who are joining also on the digital platforms. And we are so proud at Equality of our statewide partnership with Rainbow Cafe and the committee we call SASSY, Social Action for Southern Illinois. SASSY, that's right. Yeah, SASI. And the whole purpose of the statewide network is to build power so that when we as LGBTQ folks in the state need it, it's already there. Because if you're building power when you need it and you haven't already built it, you're in trouble. And what we see across the country right now is a massive attack on LGBTQ folks, trans youth in particular, 240 anti-trans bills introduced in legislatures across the country. And so it's important that we come together in gatherings like this to share with elected officials and those who want to be elected officials what matters to the community and how we can help build power. And to Carrie's point, to those who elected officials, those state senators or state representatives and other officials who didn't answer Carrie's phone calls and emails, Also, you got to think about ways of holding them accountable and get accountability. But I don't want to belabor the point. I know we got a great program tonight and great speakers, and I don't want to steal any more of Johnny's time. But thanks so much, everyone, for being part of this event tonight. This is the third and final town hall. We also held town halls with our partners in Peoria last week, and then in Bloomington Normal on Tuesday of this week. So thanks so much, Johnny.
I got it. Yeah, what are you doing? Okay. Hello, everybody. Good evening. It's great to be here. My name is Johnny Gray, and I'm a professor up at Southern Illinois University in the School of Communication Studies. I'm still wrapping my head around our reorganization on the campus, so I get a little bit confused about what it is that we are and what we do sometimes. But I am also the host and producer of Isn't It Queer on WDBX, and also sent out as a podcast. And it is my great honor tonight to get to sort of be the facilitator and the deliverer of questions and prompts to our folks who have agreed to be here and talk with us tonight. Now, that's not to put any of you at rest, because while we do have some prepared questions, we're also eager and interested in the questions that you might have and any questions that we receive online or otherwise. And Carrie and I are going to figure out how to make sure that we get those questions up here as well and what the protocol is for that. I'd like to start tonight with a relatively straightforward question and give our candidates an opportunity, our participants rather, an opportunity to introduce themselves, but also if you would, as you introduce yourself, and we'll kind of let the spirit, in the Quaker sense, the spirit lift you from your chair as you feel ready to get up and introduce yourself. Introduce yourself and tell us just a little bit about how you respond to the concerns of LGBTQ students and perhaps staff that you might have to be working with or overseeing in their experience. So a general introduction, but because we are interested in LGBTQ issues, I'd like you to just sort of take that as a broad opener and introduce what seems to come to your mind as an LGBTQ concern working with your potential new job or the job that you have right now, depending upon where you're coming from. Sound good? Sound like a good way to start? Then I will, looks like you're ready. Nancy, go ahead. Nancy.
Good evening. My name is Nancy Bittner. I am the current Assistant Regional Superintendent of Schools, and I'm running for Regional Superintendent of Schools. Part of my background, I was an educator for 10 years. I was an administrator for 12 years. I've worked for the State Board of Education, and I've also worked for as a Paul Simon Fellow for then Lieutenant Governor Pat Quinn. Part of what is happening in our state right now around these issues is education, just really educating people in our districts, not only about how they can support our youth, but also what their legal responsibility is around supporting our youth. And so I think it really is building capacity in our administrators and our teachers, our support staff to understand what they're legally required to do, but also to encourage them to do what's morally and ethically the right thing to do. And that is to make sure that no child comes to school and feels unsafe, feels bullied, or feels like they don't belong. And that's a tough sell, but that's something that we've got to do around just building that capacity and educating people on what they can do, what they should do, and how to do that. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Annette Janes, and I am a Carbondale 95 teacher, and I've been there last 27 years. Kathy's my school board president. So also I'm a former Murfreesboro school board member. I currently teach sheltered English. And so I mostly work with students that English is their second language. So I think that that kind of fits in with this too. I mean, I work with students that come to this country and want to be accepted by their peers. And that kind of goes along with it. the acceptance and modeling the acceptance and how you treat people and the words that you use and just being inclusive in everything. And so I think that's what you have to model for your staff too, that you don't allow bullying and harassment, that you welcome everyone, that you promote everybody, treating everyone fairly. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Kathy Field. I am president of the board, Carbondale Elementary District 95. Now notice, this is just the elementary district. It's Parish School, Thomas School, Lewis School, and Carbondale Middle School. Okay, if you have concerns about the high school, I'm not the one to talk to. That would be Mr. Booth, and he'd be glad to talk to you about just about anything. I think that I want to start out by saying two things. One being that your own experiences in grade school and in middle school are your experiences, and they're important and they're valuable. My job as board president is to learn your concerns and address them through policy. I recognize that this is especially important because we do employ a great many people and they all have to be brought on board, and that's where policy comes in. The other thing that I want you to take away from this is to think about the tremendous significance of middle school years in particular in a person's development. These are the years in which most young people are coming to terms with their own sexuality, whether they realize it or not. So it's vitally important that we have policies in place that do sensitize teachers, sensitize staff, and see to it that the policies are not only, typed up and posted on the district's website and so forth, but also adhered to. And that's part of my, excuse me, that's part of my job, and I'm glad to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. And as I listen to you introduce yourselves, I am moved by the incredible importance of the work that you do and what you take on. And I feel a considerable amount of gratitude to the work that you are doing and to the work that you are putting yourselves out to continue to do. I want to ask a question about well, let me just ask this question. What appropriate measures should be taken to ensure that district administrators and staff are affirming and educated on gender inclusive frameworks? We have an inclusive curriculum in Illinois, but that requires that not just our teachers, but our administrators and our district administrators all the way up the line know what they're doing. So what appropriate measures do you feel that you can take, or that your office can take, or should be taken in the administrative structure of our public education to make sure that they are qualified to address that inclusive curriculum, especially at the level of gender and sexuality?
I think you have to start the conversation first, because a lot of times people, when topics seem new to them or something new legislation is introduced, they're not comfortable with it. They don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to do the wrong thing. So a lot of what you have to do is getting the administrators on board with the law and making them very aware of what's contained in it. By the time it was supposed to be adopted was 2021, and we were all kind of busy shifting and trying to figure out how we were going to teach remotely or in person during a pandemic. And so we have to provide a lot of professional development, and we have to have a lot of conversations about the issues and make them feel comfortable so that they're on board. Because if the administrators are not on board and they're not providing the environment for their staff to feel comfortable, it's not going to go well, and it's going to fall to the wayside. So I think, a lot of it is just having those conversations and providing everybody says provide PD, but you have to provide professional development by people that are actually knowledgeable about the topics. So that's all. Thank you.
So this is an ongoing conversation in our office right now, spurred on by some of my Republican colleagues that are regional superintendents in other parts of the state that's really brought this to the forefront about how unaccepting a lot of our administrators really are to the issues around your community and around legislation and the requirements that are being put on them. So we've done two things. The first thing that we did in the fall, our office holds a countywide institute day. And we usually bring in a whole bunch of guest speakers around multiple topics. And then those people, everybody breaks out into these little workshops and you get to pick and choose. Well, this year we're not letting you pick and choose. We are bringing in Brian Braun, who is a school attorney, to really talk to every single administrator and staff member in our region about what is the law, what the law says, and what is required by the law. Then the second person that's going to come in and speak to every single employee in Region 3030 is Courtney Ortez, who does a whole presentation on choosing your why. And she's going to connect that back to what Brian Braun's going to bring to them about the legislation and what's required around the law, but also bring in, like I said earlier, that piece about what's morally and ethically the right thing to do for kids. And so that's one thing we've already got in the works for the fall. The second thing is this year we hired a family resource developer. And so she has been working with our homeless youth, our truant youth. And so one of the things that she's also going to start working on this fall is around our LGBTQ youth and what we need to be doing to help wrap around supports for those families. So our office, this is a topic that we have taken seriously, and we're already working on things to help move the needle toward equity and inclusion for everyone.
True story. When Carrie asked me to talk, I was a little bit dubious. I was like, Carrie, I don't think I have any special expertise in this area to share. And she assured me that I did, and she was right. I think we all know more than we think we do. And even more to the point, I think we all have the capacity to learn. Remember about 6 or 7 years ago, I was teaching out at John A. Logan, and they asked me to teach the sociology of marriage and family. And I started doing some of the readings, and I realized when we got to the chapter on gender and gender identity and sexual orientation, that my knowledge was not up to date. So I called a friend from the Rainbow Cafe and said, would you come and talk to my class? And they said, well, of course, delighted. And 2 of them actually came. And while they were speaking, I sat in the back of the class and took notes. As teachers, we need to be teachable. I think this is terribly important. What we don't know, we can find out, but only if we're willing. Thank you.
I want to follow a little bit on this. I want to thank you for the observations, and I think the encouragement to conversation is really important. And it seems to me on this issue, there is the level at which there might be resistance in some school districts and in some programs to follow the law, to follow the inclusive curriculum law, and to follow the sex education law that's relatively recent. But I think one of the experiences that we've had in Southern Illinois is perhaps in dragging our feet on implementing this has been some concern that we don't know how to do this curriculum. And Kathy, I think your observation at the end speaks from a more honest place of not feeling educated or up to date. But sometimes that's offered as we're waiting for the state to provide us the curriculum. Now, I looked through some of the materials provided by the Illinois Inclusive Curriculum Advisory Council, and it seems to me like there are websites and documents and information about how one might go about doing this, including, just to make sure you know, Kathy, we're not talking about only high school, but how we might deal with this in grade 4, grade 6 through 8, appropriate ways, age appropriate ways, and topic appropriate ways to deal with talking about LGBTQ issues and representing that to our LGBTQ students. So the question that's lurking in here for me is, I see the need to have the conversation. How do you, that's your carrot. Is there a stick? Is there some way that you enforce an inclusive curriculum for administrators who are not only reluctant, but plead to a kind of learned incapacity or claim that there is not curricular materials to offer that? How do we move beyond the conversation and acknowledge that some folks are not willing to have the conversation at all and are willing to say that they don't have the curricular materials to be in compliance with the law? That's my question. It's a sticky question, but I'd be very curious to see what responses any of you have to that. Do we have a volunteer to go first? We've been kind of shifting it around a bit. There we go, Nancy. Thank you, Nancy.
No problem. So one of the things that our office does is we recognize every school district. So we recommend for the State Board of Education to recognize every school district. And in order to get their funding, they have to be recognized. Part of that process is that we go to all 24 districts and we do a compliance visit. And we've actually been doing those over the last couple of months. And part of that compliance is making sure that the districts are they're following the laws around special ed, around curriculum, instruction, ELL students. And now on that compliance instrument is the LGBTQ community. There are prompts on there where they have to upload proof that this is built into their curriculum. So one of the things that our office can do is when we are out there doing these compliance visits and those boxes aren't checked or that curriculum is not uploaded so that we can see that it's there, we can put them on pending status or probationary status for their district to correct those issues. And we have done that to districts for things like licensure and fingerprinting. So that's kind of an arm of the ROE where we can kind of twist a little bit and maybe enforce some of the things that need to be enforced a little bit stronger. But that's only one piece of this. I still think, again, it comes back to building relationships to have those difficult conversations with superintendents to say, you have to do this. And this is what we will be willing to do if you don't do these things. And like I said, it's not something that's not been done in the past. It's just making sure, number one, that we tell them what the expectation is. We tell them just like a kid, we tell them what the expectation is. We tell them what the consequence is going to be, and then we give them an opportunity to meet the expectation. Thank you.
I think that you can kind of have everybody in a room and force them to go through PD. But I don't think you're going to get a lot of buy-in when you do that method. I mean, I've been in education for 28, going on 30 years, and I don't buy into it when that's what's brought down to me. That's not the way to get my acceptance. That's not the way to get me to put things into action. So you have to go and you have to have smaller groups, and you have to find those people that are willing to put themselves out there and are willing to do the work and are all, or, you know, there are teachers in our area that are already doing these things. They're already talking about the contributions. You know, when I teach about Hispanic heritage, I'm already talking about Frida Kahlo and her contributions. I'm already doing those things. And so you need to find those educators that are already doing it, and then their peers are going to want to do it, and you build out like that. And of course you tell everybody the legal requirements. Of course you do. But if you really want to get the buy-in and you really want to have this happen, you have to start with groups of people that are willing to make it happen. And by forcing people and telling them that they have to make it happen, we know how that goes, right? We do. And if we really want this is important work. And it's going to take time. And we have to be willing to put in that work. And again, we have to get people that are knowledgeable about the topics too, and not let people that aren't knowledgeable about it make the programs and make the curriculum and put things in place that are not going to be beneficial.
I can't speak to other districts and whether they do or do not comply with state law regarding the incorporation of LGBTQ individuals into the history curriculum, or whether or not they comply with the Illinois Department of Human Rights guidance. In preparation for this, I did check with our Director of Data Reporting and Programs, and I said, "Are we?" And she said, "We are." It may be the case that top-down policy is less than optimum for classroom instruction, but I do want to point out that the state of Illinois, by passing such laws, gives us the necessary political coverage that we need to insist upon inclusive curriculum and proper instruction and human rights. I want you to notice, and this is going to be a topic that I'll come back to again and again if you give me a chance, but notice that we're living in a blue state, and it makes all the difference. We're living in a state where people pass laws that say, you can't exclude us. You don't get to do that, not here, not in our state. And I think that matters. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is, I'm very much learning a lot about the kinds of issues that you have to negotiate, and it is informative to me. So thank you for that very much here. You know, one of the questions that came up for me when I was talking around with various folks involved in our community, we wanted to start out sort of really focusing in on specifically what our districts are having to deal with and the kinds of things that you're having to deal with in your districts. And as you heard Carrie give the introduction, our primary focus and our primary interest here has been about youth and about the students in charge. But I want to take a minute to acknowledge that you're working with adults as well, the teachers, the staff, et cetera, in the educational facilities that are trying to work with students. we learned not too long ago about the struggles a not too far away school system was having in setting up a GSA because they couldn't find a faculty advisor. It was too threatening to the faculty member to be the advisor for a GSA organization, a gay straight alliance or a gender and sexuality alliance, to step forward and do that work, which says to me that allies or LGBTQ identified faculty and staff are not feeling in some of our school districts like they are operating in an unhostile or a supportive environment. So the question that I would like to ask you to think about in the role that you either have or the role that you are seeking votes to have is, what is your role in protecting the rights of educators to have their sexual orientation and gender orientation protected against discrimination? Yes, we live in a blue state. We live in a very red region of a blue state where we have fairly strong non-discrimination policies. But if a stronger non-discrimination policy for faculty and staff that explicitly includes sexual orientation and gender identity and expression were brought forward, would you support that? And how do you speak to teachers who don't feel safe enough to step up and advise a GSA? Again, this is a question particularly less about students this time than it is about the staff and staff rights. Do you want to? Okay, thank you.
I would definitely support such legislation. Another part of my history is I have been a local union president before, and so I've dealt with issues in which staff felt like they were being targeted because of their sexual orientation or treated unfairly, and afraid to come forward and talk about those things. And I've had to advocate for people that didn't feel comfortable sharing that information with anybody else. So I have been in that role. And it is very important that they feel comfortable and it's important for the students too, to know that that's okay. And to feel comfortable identifying with their instructors. And so I would very much support legislation in which people could be who they are. Absolutely.
I would also support that type of legislation. The idea that anyone in a school building feels unsafe to be who they are, whether that's a student or an adult, is very disheartening. It's very sad. It's actually heartbreaking because our schools should be safe for everyone, students and staff alike. Again, it goes back to building that capacity with administrators to make sure that if there is an issue, that staff feel comfortable coming to them, that it is open door, that it is, those types of concerns are welcoming and addressed and taken seriously. We have a lot of room to grow, I think, as just a society, but we also have room to grow as just individuals who need to care about people and really support each other and lift each other up. And so a lot of that is around that building that capacity within the schools to do that.
What a dilemma that would be for teachers. I mean, you have several choices here. You can either present yourself as being LGBTQ, or you can keep that information to yourself. And if you are out, then everyone's going to make you into their go-to person. Oh, we need a sponsor for these kids. That's got to be you. This is not unlike the dilemma that other minority teachers find themselves in. There's a whole wealth of literature about Black teachers, for example, having to mentor all the Black kids and so on and so forth. It's very similar to that. On the other hand, if you have not been open about your sexual orientation, your gender identity, offering to take this job, whether, mentoring or teaching or otherwise being the go-to person, might out you. And then in the third case, you have, let's say you have a teacher who's heterosexual, cisgender, and they're willing to do this too. But what might people think of them? Would they be outing themselves as something they are not? So it's a dilemma. And it's a dilemma that we need to be sensitive to, all of us. Thank you.
Okay, friends. We've asked, I think, some hard questions and I think gotten some really interesting answers. And I hope you've gotten a sense of the folks who are willing to come and speak with us tonight. And so my question now is not for them. Well, not yet, in a roundabout way. My question is for you, and that is, having heard some of the issues that have come up tonight, do you out there have some questions that you would like to ask? And our wonderful YouTube viewers, you might have a blank podium here for a minute while I run a microphone out to some people. But I'm curious if there's any questions from the audience or questions that sort of tie into some of the things that we've been doing and talking about so far that you're itching or burning to ask. I see a hand up back there. Is it working? It is working. There we go.
Thank you. I just had a quick question about harm reduction and what efforts might be put forward by you all in your positions to have, I guess, to reduce harm in the sense of LGBTQ youth, specifically maybe within the context of misinformation, particularly being in an area that is a little mixed in terms of political ideologies. So I know Marion, for instance, recently had some viral post about bathrooms and litter boxes. So what might be done to reduce the harm in those types of misinformation posts that do then go viral and then impact the students on the schools?
We'll still have to use the podium, but do we have a taker, Kathy? Thank you, Kathy.
You seriously want me to take on social media? Oh my. Oh my. Harm reduction. When what students say to each other is tremendously harmful. In fact, I wonder if it's not more harmful than the messages that they might be getting from, well-meaning adults at a public school. Certainly, if you're aware of such messages and you have the willingness to dig in, you should do that. And maybe if you don't have the willingness, you should dig in and challenge people. Sometimes if I've got a problem and you can't solve my problem, no matter how hard you try, it's enough that I know that you know, that I'm not alone, that you're by my side, even if, everybody else on TikTok and Facebook are against you.
I think it goes back to building each other up. So if we are giving students tools in their toolbox from the time that they're small to feel empowered, to feel their worth, to feel that they are safe and encouraged. And those types of things when you're young kind of give you a little bit of armor to deal with some of those things that may happen later on in life. It's not going to sting any less, but at least you have coping skills to be able to work through it. And even as adults, there are bullies in our lives, but we've built up enough tools and coping skills in our toolbox that those kinds of things don't hurt near as much. They still sting a little bit, but they don't hurt near as much. And so I think really for me, that question starts day one of pre-K. And that's building an inclusionary classroom from the beginning so that students aren't made to feel different or unaccepted. And you just keep building on that and building on that and building on that and making sure those coping skills are strong so that when these things do happen to them and people say things on social media, because they're going to, you have more self-confidence and self-worth to maybe fight those off a little bit better.
I think it goes back to what we're all supposed to be doing in the schools and building relationships with the students. And so that they have the relationships with one another, that they can have those honest conversations with one another. And they feel like they're accepted by others. And they don't want to go on social media and hurt their peers. If you go back to, the acceptance and teaching appropriate behaviors, I'm thinking of an example, a recent, all too recent example of students wanting to use, it's one thing to use adjectives if you're describing people in your community, and it's quite another to use them to be hurtful to one another. And so having those conversations, I think the educators have to have those relationships with the students that they can have those conversations, and that the school district will stop what they're doing and take the time to have those conversations. I know that we're constantly in 95, constantly stopping what we're doing and having conversations about what's currently going on and what we all need to do to fix it. Because we all play a role in it, and everybody has to work together to fix those things.
Yes, please, Kathy. One more.
I'm still thinking about your question about harm reduction. I think if there was one single thing that I would do to try to reduce the harm done, would be to explain to children, I don't know, shouting into the great void that is social media, may or may not land. But in the classrooms, in our discussions, I would want kids to understand what homophobia is. Because what I found when I was teaching at John A. is that even college students don't know what it is. They think it just means, afraid of gay people. That's not what it means. The word homophobia, as used by sociologists, means you're afraid that someone might think you yourself are gay. And I think a lot of the harm, especially among young people, comes from that fear. If you step back away from that, and I think kids can understand, live and let live. I don't have to live like you live. But if people start thinking I'm living like you, that's where the fear begins. And that's where it needs to be addressed, I think.
It seemed like we kind of focused on the social media aspect. I think
Yeah.
for me, that was more of an, thank you. Thank you. More of an example of misinformation in the community, specifically targeted toward what I would consider the parents or people that are, in the school district, perhaps paying property taxes, which then go to the schools. So
Yeah.
I think my concern here is not specifically what are we doing for the students, but what are we doing for the parents in districts that might not be accepting of this type of information, that might, let's say, in the most extreme cases, pull their children out of your school because they don't necessarily agree with this policy that's been put in place by the state of Illinois, or they're seeing this misinformation that's not being addressed by members of the district.
We tell them that Trinity Christian School is enrolling for fall.
I'm reading the room. It doesn't look like you want to add to your
I think
comments.
that
That-
said
There
it
you
all.
go. I think we'll let that take the place. I do have another question from the floor here.
Thank you all for being here this evening. I really appreciate that you were willing to come. I know others were asked and either didn't show up and some didn't even return the messages. So thank you for being here. We have talked about, and each of you have supported the idea that everyone in a school, regardless of age, should feel safe and supported. I'd like to know what you say to a parent or a teacher or a student or an administrator who comes to you and says, for example, this transgender person using this locker room makes me feel unsafe. Or if I can't post these Bible verses in my room, I don't feel supported at this school.
Fancy.
You know, as a regional superintendent of schools, we have our hands tied in a lot of ways because Illinois is what's called a local control state. So that means that your local school board determines the policies for that school. Now, do their policies say we're going to follow the laws as they're written? Absolutely. Does what happens in practice? Sometimes. I have had difficult conversations with regional superintendents in other parts of our state that we have got to become aware of our own white middle-class privilege that says to us, we are somehow more affected than the group of people who are asking us to include them. And when you start to say that to people, they get very angry very quickly because, well, number one, nobody really understands white middle-class privilege, but, and that's a whole nother conversation. But in the process, it's just starting to build awareness that there is no harm to the majority to include everybody, to make them feel safe and welcomed and part of your community. There is no harm. And again, they're difficult conversations. And I have had Cheryl Graff, who is our regional superintendent a few months ago, she just kind of tapped me on the shoulder because she knew that my blood pressure was getting really high as this white middle-class man sitting across from me began to lecture me about why I was wrong, that we needed to be more inclusive, and that this is a new problem that's being created by awareness. And I think that we just have to keep slamming those conversations home, even when they're difficult, even when they're with people that are above us or have a higher title than us, that there is no harm in doing the right thing.
Although there are policies and local control, there's also contracts. I know that, in like districts around the area, it is specifically stated in contracts what they can put in their classrooms as far as religions, and in public schools, that's not allowed. And so I think that you have to explain that everybody has rights and your rights don't get to trump their rights, and that I guess, I don't know, it seems so crazy to think that people would feel like they had the privilege, like you were saying, to feel that they were superior, that they could, I guess, trample on those people. But things are addressed. And I think giving them the information about their rights and the person's rights, and that you have to be accepting, they have rights, they can be there. And it's just putting it out there and explaining that it's not going to be accepted to mistreat people or to put your, because you have to, I mean, especially in this area, there's all kinds of different religions and Bible verses. And then once you explain that other people could also put their Bible verses up or what they believe or the Quran, I mean, they break it down and understand a little bit more when you explain all of the things that could happen that they wouldn't like to.
We're going to let Kathy, and then I'm going to, go ahead, Kathy, if you have, no, okay. I have a question right here.
Thank you. I am so appreciative, as already has been mentioned, that this type of forum would be held in Southern Illinois, where I've been born and raised, as you might be able to tell. And I am so happy to live in Jackson County and be able to come to Carbondale. But in reality of our two candidates, you will be the superintendent, regional superintendent of 5 counties. Now, my grandchild, when I used to go pick him up for band, I can remember that child plastered to the wall in fear while the other children were playing, and then being so totally embarrassed when he saw that I saw it and noticed it. I asked an educator there, how can you help a transgender child? And I was told, I don't know anything about trans. I don't know anything. And I've certainly had a learning curve myself and still am learning. And now he's 20 and very happy at University of Kansas. And moved from Murfreesboro to Ames, Iowa in 8th grade, where there was a wonderful connections group that he could join and be accepted, and the proper pronouns would be used by his teachers, and name changes is no problem. And I'm also glad that in Illinois, the part that's blue can have the birth certificate changed and all that. But if I could not get support, because I know that person that some of you know as well, who tried to start an LGBTQ plus group in the high school where she worked in a nearby county, and she was not allowed to start that group. So if I could not get any redress from my school, and I said, okay, I'm going to go to the top in the region. I'm going to go to Jackson County Regional Superintendent and ask how I can get help for my child. What would you say to me as a grandparent or a parent of, and a proud parent or grandparent of a transgender individual?
Well, Sharon, thank you for sharing that. So one of the things that we've implemented this year is a family resource developer position in our office. And that person is, all she does is collect resources for families, so that when we get that call, how do I get support? We can immediately pull something out and say, let me connect you with this person. And I'll call them first and tell them that you're calling and this is why you're going to call. And then either they can call you if you're comfortable with that, or then you can call them and talk to them. So that's one of the things that we've put in place. But I will share with you, when I announced that I was running for this position, I had a very dear friend of mine who's a Democrat in Jackson County say to me, "You're too Democrat for Union, Pulaski, and Alexander County. You're going to have to temper this a little bit." That's not who I am. When I say it, I mean it, and it's the truth. And so while that may lose me some votes down there, you all are very aware we have a school district in Union County right now that needs somebody to stand up and say, this is not okay. And I don't have to tell you who that is. I think most of us probably know who that is. And so as the regional superintendent, I have to be willing to stand up to that superintendent and say, no, this is not how you are going to handle this. This is the law. This is what's right. These are the resources you can give that family. But you have to be willing to take that stand, even in those counties we have who are more red than blue, and say, no, this is the expectation, this is the law, and this is, we're going to work together, but we're going to figure out how to do this and do it the right way.
I think a benefit that I have of being a resident in Jackson County, and I've been here since I came to SIU in 1988, and I've stayed around, and I've been teaching, and I know educators in all of these counties. I have resources of people that I know in each of the communities that would be able to help me with other people in the communities that could be a resource to those family members. I know also relationships that I've built with people from Rainbow Cafe, Equality Illinois, the Survivor Empowerment Center, just here in Carbondale. I call on those people when I have questions and need help and need experts. And that's what I would do as regional soup. I've built those relationships with people in all the counties because I've been here so long. And so I have resources that I can call on when I need help. I had a situation last year, Carly Copley's here, and she helped me through some questions that I had with a student that came to me and had some questions and was wondering where to go. And Carly pulled all kinds of information for me so that I could educate myself. And I think that's, one of the biggest things is when things come to you, educating yourself and pulling from all the experts that you know in the area to help people.
I'm glad I don't have to deal with red counties.
Oh, Kathy, the terse answer. I think I have a question right here. About 6 inches away.
Back 6 inches away, he said. I got a big mouth. So, my question is for you, Nancy. I need to back up a minute. You said Illinois was unique in the sense that each school board could set its own policy.
Well, they can, the answer to that is twofold. Yes. Yes and no. Yes, they can set their own policies. There are certain ones they have to adopt, but they do have some flexibility on adding to it. So the federal government says you have to do this. The state says you have to do this. A local school board could go above and beyond that. So they do have local control over maybe additional graduation requirements. In some of our districts, it takes 21 credits to graduate. We have a district that takes 27 credits to graduate. So in that matter, yes, they can set some policy. So they have to set the federal policy. They have to set the state policy, but then they can interject their own policies over and above those.
So you're saying they can set whatever policy they want for the LGBTQ issues? and the trans
Absolutely.
issues?
Mhm. And they can go
So,
over and above what they're already doing.
Let me get this, so they can do whatever they want.
No, I don't know. They
Well,
have
I
to.
mean, if they
they
set the
follow this-
federal,
if
Then
they-
there's a state, then they can do what they want. Is what
Yes,
I'm
we have
hearing.
districts in the collar counties who have policies above and beyond what the state has. Yes,
Okay.
above and beyond.
If they have to follow state policy, but they can add additional things on top, if I'm understanding right.
So we already have school districts in Illinois that allow for transgender athletes, although that's not mandated at this time.
Mhm.
So there are already policies in place for those kinds of things.
I want to make sure that was a clarification question, so I don't know that. Okay, good. We have more questions over here.
I think we've talked a lot about inclusion. I don't think anyone here will say, oh, we actually don't think that LGBT kids should be included. But specifically talking about the policies that should be enacted to ensure that, specifically in regards to bullying, including those by teachers. Recently in Carbondale, there was several instances of a youth not being called by their correct name and pronouns by a teacher. And upon reporting that, nothing was done. What policies will you put into place to ensure that these reports against teachers and against fellow students, but primarily teachers, are followed through by administration?
I'll let you start this one.
I can't speak to that specific incident. I hope it was not Carbondale District 95. But I downloaded this from board policy. This directly pertains to elementary district. And what it says is that the goal of accommodation is to allow a transgender or gender nonconforming student to equally participate in educational and extracurricular opportunities. The rights are generally found in legislation. However, it goes on to add, it says, the superintendent may establish a gender support team that will identify accommodations for a specific student. These accommodations, this is not an exhaustive list, but it includes gender transition, names and pronouns, school records, student privacy, confidentiality, access to gender segregated areas such as locker rooms and restrooms, sports and PE classes, participation in competitive activities, dress codes, gender segregation in other areas, class discussions and field trips. And it goes on. In short, the policy is that there will be no discrimination against a student or by extension, an employee who is transgender or gender nonconforming. And if this does indeed happen in Carbondale Elementary Schools, you can also find my email address on the website.
IASB helps districts in setting their policies as far as making sure that it's follow through. I don't know that the Regional Office of Education could make sure that individual districts actually follow their policies and had a remedy and did it in the way that would be acceptable. Whenever there is an accusation or against a staff member, there's other things that come into play, like their CBA, the collective bargaining agreement, and how that will occur. So there's a lot depending on where it was and what it occurred in all those, contracts and how that process occurs. So I don't know that I could say that anyone could definitely make sure that they followed through on their policies.
So that policy that she just read is mandated to be on every district's website. So no matter what district that you're in, if you go to their website, you can pull up every policy that they already have on the books and approved. And so my recommendation in that case would be that you research that policy. And when you go in, you say, this is your policy. This is what you say you're going to do for discrimination. This is what you say you're going to do for bullying. This is what because that's really the law. That's the law of the district. Once they put it in policy and it's adopted, that's the law for that district. So when you go in, part of it's just being armed with all of the evidence that you have. And they post that on their website for you. So when those things happen, you print those pages off and you go in and you say, this is what it says. This is what you have to do. And so that gives you one more just way to really push for them to follow their policy. I agree with Annette. There isn't a whole lot that the ROE can do to mandate districts to follow their policy. There's a lot that you all can do to make districts follow their policy. But one of those things is just being educated about what it exactly says and then calling them on the carpet if they're not following it.
Myself being a student of one of the districts that is only represented here by myself and a few other students, what are you doing to make students and staff feel comfortable who are coming from districts who are not supportive, who may have been mentioned here tonight, that are continuing to have these problems with discrimination and bullying for LGBTQ students and many other students that are minorities?
I guess I'll go first. Well, one of the things that I think my office could do, on top of providing the professional development and starting the difficult conversations with staff, is to also be opening to listening to you all. So right now, under our current administrator, which she's fantastic, she's done a lot of great things for our region, we don't have an avenue to hear from students. We have an avenue to hear from parents. We have an avenue to hear from teachers. We have an avenue to hear from administrators, but we don't have an avenue to hear from students. So one of the things I can do, you know, if elected, is to open up a way for conversations to be had with students in all districts across all groups, to really start those conversations about what it is that you all need from us. Because right now, the only voices we hear a lot of are the adult voices. So one of the things I can do is open my office up to listen more to the student voices.
I think having those relationships in communities that do have successful GSA programs and mentors and people that are willing to make themselves allies, and putting you in touch with those people to help you get started and to find people in your community that will support you and be allies and will be willing to speak up for you. Because I know it's sometimes hard, you know, especially for students to get that respect and get listened to. But you do have allies in all of the communities, I believe, in Southern Illinois that are willing to put themselves out there for you and to help you through that. So I think for me, I mean, coming to me and letting me know what you need, and I will help you get in touch with those people that will help you. And I'm not, you know, I'm not saying when I get elected, I'm saying right now. I'm saying, come to me and let's work together, and I'll put you in touch with some people that I know in different high schools in the area that have successful programs right now.
This is true for Carbondale Elementary, and it may be true for other schools as well. But it's part of our policy that any student may file a sex equity complaint under our policies. You don't have to wait for a grown-up. If you know your rights, you can demand your rights.
I want to take a moment to ask a moderator question here, because I feel like it's one of the ones that sort of looming like an elephant in the room. We are a relatively blue island in a relatively red part of the state, and we are a relatively blue state in a relatively red part of the country. We're aware that in Florida and really in 19 other states, so-called Don't Say Gay bills are moving forward. We're aware of some of the stuff that's going on down in Texas that's targeting trans youth healthcare. And while we might say, whew, great that we live in Illinois, right? We also know that the news of these kinds of legislation and the prevalence of this legislation, starting last year with the trans athlete bans and coming this year into LGBTQ curriculum bans and Don't Say Gay bills, are having an incredible stressful effect on LGBTQ youth who are already under a lot of stress to begin with. The stats and figures in some of the bills that we passed recently show that the kind of stress and the kind of dangers that they face are much higher than their cis and heterosexual counterparts as students. So my question for you is twofold. One, in your capacity as you're working, what kind of impact is this kind of legislation spreading so rapidly across the country in red states having on your work? And how is that affecting you? I would love to hear that information. And two, what can we do in Illinois to help these students and faculty and staff who are under so much stress as LGBTQ rights and trans rights, and especially trans health rights, become increasingly a culture war and a wedge issue in intensifying political campaigns?
There is a higher incidence of suicide and depression in those youth that experience that. So definitely have to provide those support services for those students going through that, to have that acceptance and that I think also continuing to stay in contact with your legislators and making them aware of the issues. I know that another part of my past was being a grassroots political activist in the area. And being a Democrat, I had to contact the Republicans in the area every time a bill was coming up that impacted education. And staying, and don't feel, you can't feel like, well, they're not going to listen to me. You have to make them listen to you, and you have to go to them, and you have to talk to them and explain to them, and you have to take stories to them about how it impacts real people, real constituents that are living right here in their districts. And people have to stay in contact with them and know how these things are impacting them. And I think those are the things you can do, having town halls, somehow finding the people that will make them come to the town halls, make them feel guilty for not being here tonight. Dealing with the issues that, we're all constituents of theirs, and they should listen to our issues and help us feel that we can trust them to vote the way that we need them to, so that these legislations do not impact our youth.
So a couple of things that our office is already kind of doing around this, because let's be honest, with the pandemic, the stress level of our students, every one of our students is through the roof. So, and I'm at, this is just adding another layer onto what's already been a stressful 2 years. The first thing that we do is we provide free instruction for youth mental health first aid. So youth mental health first aid is a 5-step process to help students in stress or crisis to start to build coping skills and to build capacity to find ways to reduce that stress and to find ways to deal with crisis and things that are going on in their lives. So we already do that free. We do one a month. It's open to the entire community. It's not just teachers and administrators. So if you're someone who works with youth 12 to 18, and these are skills that you would like to have, if you call our office, we can get you hooked up to come. It's a 1-day class. There's a little bit of pre-work and a little bit of post-work, but then you are able to train other adults in how to implement these types of programs. And so Youth Mental Health First Aid is a national program that really focuses on youth 12 to 18 and how to start to reduce that stress. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that this spring, our office got a $30,000 grant to provide an SEL coach, a social emotional learning coach for all of our districts. And so we have hired a person, and they are going in to really listen to the districts about what they need around social emotional learning, social emotional health, and how can we connect them with resources and people in the community to work with their youth, to work with adults if needed, in order to start to try to address some of these issues. So that's two things our office is doing right now to help combat that.
Here's the deal. All of these red states, yes, I know I'm using shorthand, but it saves time, and we haven't much time left. All of these red state laws and policies, all of these red county superintendents who don't want to follow the damn law, I have become aware that what's happening is just another step in the ongoing project to return the United States to some imagined past white nationalist Christian homeland. It's just one more issue that they can use to beat people over the head. And I know that this is all, people's lives are involved, and I'm not being flippant about that. What I am being flippant about is the idea that we need to understand them or talk to them. I'm done talking to bullies. What needs to happen is they need to lose. They need to lose elections. They need to lose jobs. They need to lose money. They need to lose custody of their kids. They need to lose. And if we're the only ones that can make that happen, then that's what we should be doing.
Thank you.
Thank you. My question is about sex education. I think the vast majority of our sex education in the US is violently cis-normative, heteronormative. What would an ideal sex education system look like that actually includes LGBTQ, like, youth?
You come to the Unitarian Church and we need to start a big class of our sex ed because it covers everything.
How do we get them here? I love that.
It's called OWL. It starts from preschoolers through adults. We have the whole gamut, and there's another.
Oh, but thank you so much. I want to just interject here. We have an online community here, and they can only hear who's on the mic. And I think that the laugh there is sort of about both. It's offered in some places, but also, if I'm understanding right, the challenge of a truly LGBTQ inclusive sex education. Hey, we just got a new sex education initiative here about 2 years ago. 1 year ago, I guess the governor signed it in. Yeah, as Mike Zeri can tell us, we got some things, yay, and we didn't get some things with that. We had to abandon some things with that. But I like the question as I understand it, which is what, from your perspective, even admitting the limits of what you can do in the offices that you have, what would a truly LGBTQ inclusive sex education look like, and what would you push for even more than what we have right now and the mandated sex education for Illinois that we're having a hard time getting some people to do? That is fair.
So here's my problem with the new law. So the new law put all of these things in place, and then they left a little bitty loophole in there for districts to opt out. So if they don't offer the class, they don't have to implement the law. So if they keep their course code that they currently have, they can teach exactly the same way they've been doing it all along. If they choose the new course code, then they have to implement the new curriculum, which is a whole lot better than the traditional curriculum. So at this point, I think the focus has to be on closing the loophole. It has to be on taking that additional SIP code, the old SIP code, off the books. It's a one sentence piece of legislation. Remove course code, da, 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 da. That's all it has to say. Doesn't have to say anything about sex education. It doesn't have to say anything about health education. That's all it needs. And that would close the loophole. So then every district has to offer the new curriculum. And so as in my position, what I would do is wholly support the legislator who puts forth that one sentence piece of legislation. Because I can't mandate districts to offer the new course because the legislation left it open for them to choose.
I think the question was an ideal program, right? And that I don't have an answer to, because I think about all the curriculum that I've ever had to develop, and I've yet to find an ideal curriculum. So I think it would just have to be a group of experts coming through and everybody having the conversation and putting their points of view in and compromising to come up with something that's ideal. But me alone, I can't come up with an ideal curriculum, to be honest.
Are we bowing out on this one, Kathy? You don't, okay, go, there you go.
If the teacher can't answer that.
I have a last question, but I think. I have a last closing question, but I also wanted to, we have somebody over here who hasn't had a chance. Yeah, let me jog across the great big Unitarian Fellowship space.
I just want to point out that Nancy was correct when she said that if you teach a little bit of it, you have to teach all of it. If you or you can opt to teach none of it. But there are laws on the book. There's Aaron's Law, and there is a consent law currently for 6 through 12, and they just developed a K through 12 law, KYHSA. So if they teach a little bit of it, they have to teach all of it, is the thing. So I just want to add that. So there is a little beacon of hope there.
Can I add just one more thing?
Sure.
So what we see districts doing under Aaron's Law and some of those other things is it doesn't say how much they have to teach of it. So they could spend one day on it and meet the letter of the law. Are they really doing it justice? Are they really doing what needs to be done to cover it? Maybe. But I think that's another thing too, when we pass these laws that mandate curriculum, then the State Board of Ed needs to provide what the parameters of that needs to be and what all has to be covered. Because right now they say, you have to cover this. We have 27 mandated units of study on the books right now. There's 3 more coming in the fall veto session, we believe. But most districts spend one day and that checks the box. So I think too, we want it to be comprehensive and effective. And so I think there still is a lot of work, a lot of things that could be done there, but you are right. If they do one little piece, they have to do it all. And that comes in those SIP codes. And so what most districts in this region are doing is they're opting for the old SIP code because then they don't even have to touch it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think one thing the ROE could do to help with that is to provide the professional development for those. Because although, you have Aaron's Law, a lot of districts, I mean, when I was on the school board in Murphy and, teaching in Carbondale, some people don't know how to put those things in place. They know it's a law, but they don't know how to get started with it. So I think one thing that the Regional Office of Education could do is make districts feel more comfortable by providing those experts to them to help them put those things into place. And I know Carbondale, everybody kind of knew about it and people were doing little things here and there, but until we had training and took the initiative to get that, people weren't really sure what they were doing and the words to use. So I think those are some of the supports that could be provided.
We are coming close to the end of our time together, and I want to thank you all for being here and talking with us tonight. I know that we sent out ahead of time or tried to at some point communicate with you what we anticipated some of the questions we would ask were. And I know that we hit many of them, but we also, allowed a space for other people to ask questions, which I think is really important. So as a last question to you and on the way out the door, is there something that we didn't get to talk about tonight that you would like to make this particular community aware of about your candidacy, about your office, and its relationship to LGBTQ's concerns?
I'm really open to learning. So I think if there's anybody that has more to teach me or can give me resources or can tell me how to be better informed or how to advocate more for the LGBTQ community, I'm really open to all of that. So, I mean, please, I'm very approachable. For those of you that know me in the room, you know that you can come to me or reach out to me on Facebook or email me or call me, whatever, and anything that I can do, I will do.
I think at this point, it's about building that bridge and relationships. And again, I believe strongly that we do need to hear student voices more. And so that's one thing that I would like to see our office. I'm actually going to take that back to the regional soup tomorrow and say, is there a platform that we can open up to hear student voices? So that's my takeaway from tonight, is how do we start that tomorrow? Now, I'm not the boss, so I can't guarantee you that's going to happen, but I am going to guarantee you that I will have the conversation tomorrow, the serious conversation that we need a platform to hear your voices. And so that's kind of my takeaway from tonight.
Years ago, when I was teaching, I had an older man in one of my college classes. He was clearly in his 60s or in his 70s. He was, he used one of those electric carts to get around. So, he wasn't in very good health. And I could not, for the life of me, figure out what he was doing in my classes. But the first couple of times he spoke, he scared me to death. He started each time that we'd be talking about sexuality, which was fairly frequently. He would begin by saying, well, my church teaches. And I'm like, oh, there's the professor's dilemma. Am I right? You've got a student you got to shut down and you really don't want to because they're a student and they're there to learn from you. But after 3 or 4 times he did this, I started to notice a pattern. And the pattern was this. He would always start out, and it was almost, it just occurred to me, this is the way Jesus used to structure some of his parables. He would say, now the Pharisees say this, but I say this. And I started to notice that that's kind of what he was doing. He was saying, he would start out by saying, well, my church teaches. And of course, he was from a red county that I won't mention. So I was already pretty confident I knew what his church taught. And he would lay it out pretty straightforwardly, but then he would add, but who am I to judge? Why can't people just live? And pretty soon all the students were just kind of like hanging on his every word. So I want to say, it's not the churches as well, it's not the religion as such. It's some churches, and they can be fought. We don't have to respect everybody's belief just because it's sincerely held. And in fact, we don't, if we're honest. And I think we have in this country spent too much time tiptoeing around people's sincerely held religious beliefs. I can't think of any objection to lesbian, gay, transgender, queer people. I can't think of a single objection that's not rooted in religious bigotry. And we don't have to respect that. We can respect people, but we don't have to respect everything that comes out of their mouths. Unless, as by happy accident, there's an old man in your class who's really an angel unaware. It happens.
On the wall, our time is out. I would like to thank all of you for the work that you do, for the work that you are aspiring to do and campaigning to do. You are very knowledgeable, very smart. You are women lifting the weight and understanding the policies, educational and otherwise, of this state. And I think we are honored to have the opportunity to get to ask you some hard questions tonight and to hear your very, very thoughtful answers. Thank you for coming tonight, and I hope maybe you'll hang out for a few minutes and just let us make those kinds of connections. And everybody, thank you for coming and offering your good questions tonight. This has been a joy. Carrie, is there something else? Thank you.